I only came to take it seriously when I was looking for some answer to the dilemma that I had been in and that leaders are in. And it was almost as if I had this aha kind of moment that said, it's right in front of you,
Yes.
but you haven't taken enough notice.
Hello again, and welcome to our final conversation in the mentoring series with Keith Farmer. I'm Leigh Hatcher, and Keith, this time we're going to rip through a whole lot of very practical questions, like a Q&A, that have flowed out of our marvellous conversations. A lot of stuff we've covered has been very practical, but this is a whole range of what I think is really interesting kind of questions about where to from here. You up for this?
Yes.
Okay. First question. Having seen this series and heard you on mentoring, maybe I'm thinking, yeah, I think in all humility, I think I'd be up for this. What do I do now? Where do I go?
Okay, that's both an urgent and important question.
Yeah.
Urgent because I think leaders really need mentors to come alongside them. Very, very current. That need is increasing all the time, but also there's gradually a recognition on the part of people who have had ministry and leadership experience that this could be a part of the next stage of my life and ministry. People can slide into mentoring. You don't have to become a full-time mentor. Lots of people have started with 2 or 3 mentorees, and some pastors whom I've been in contact with ask their board, can I do a half a day a week in mentoring? So I'll drop down, and they then stay in local church ministry but also give the benefit of their years of experience.
So it could start quite casually.
Yes.
And that's a bit of a test in the water, isn't it?
Yes, it
Toe in the
is.
water.
And I think there's a consciousness-raising education opportunity at the moment just to help people who are in ministry to know this resource could really help you. And secondly, to help people who are able to give as mentors to know, one, that they could be an incredible resource to some less experienced or younger people in ministry, and two, that they don't have to do a great deal of training. They have to do some, we call it top-up training, just to fill in the gaps and whatever, to give them enough structure and confidence to be able to go in to mentoring. But the top-up training, we do it in about 4 half days for people who are sensing that God is leading them towards this as part of their ministry.
But we really need to say to this person, mate, it's not about you.
Yes, that's right.
Why?
Yes. So there's the Australian Christian Mentoring Network. Some people may be aware of that. We ask people who are going to do the top-up training whether they could become members of that network, and that involves some accreditation. So, and we also, I've linked with Tim Hanna, and we've come under Partners in Ministry to build a bank of mentors across Australia, across denominational, within the evangelical Pentecostal network, so that there's a safety available to people who may wish to be mentored by somebody outside their own network, because sometimes if it's a person who could affect your future ministry prospects, you're not going to be as open as honest. So that safety factor. And I've mentored across networks, and I don't find any, particularly within the evangelical networks. So there's a bank of people who are being, at the moment, built, and we ask their own network or somebody within their own denomination to vouch for the fact that this is a person of significant leadership experience and integrity, so that we keep the quality of the mentors, so that anywhere in Australia at some stage, a person could say, who's available to mentor me? So we're gradually building a bank.
Okay. And considering the very great needs that we covered of the leader today, the Christian leader, the pastor, and the denominations would have to be aware of that. Are you finding that denominations are more open to mentoring, the whole concept of mentoring?
Yes.
Because it can often be quite a closed shop in denominations.
Yes. Can I tell you quickly a story? I mentioned that tomorrow on a Zoom 1 hour presentation, that is to ACC pastors, and we've done 2 previous ones of these, and the first one, the estimate from within ACC, Australian Christian Church, was that we probably would have about 15 pastors in our room. We ended up with 270.
Whoa.
And the second one, it's estimated, when you take into account the teams watched, that there were approximately 400 pastors watching. And Tim Hanna and I were gobsmacked by that, basically saying we had no idea. And the leaders of that network were also saying, wow, this must be something that pastors are really wanting, both in terms of maybe accessing a mentor, but also maybe becoming mentors.
And an expression of the need there,
yes.
actually. Yeah.
Yes.
Who should I have alongside me if I'm a mentor, Keith?
A mentor needs to be mentored so that...
Always?
I would find it difficult to have integrity as a mentor without... When I was at the college, I became sold on mentoring, and that was basically because I went through some really tough times, and I actually believe that it was that support and some of the strategies that I received through my mentor that got me through. So I then started to bring mentoring into the life of the college, and we actually had a spiritual formation stream where every student needed to have a mentor. So it got me believing that this was a really important resource. So I guess you could mentor without actually being mentored. It doesn't mean that the person who is mentoring you is a guru or a standout kind of person. No. In fact, it's almost the opposite.
Yes.
The person who I mentioned passed away, who was my last mentor. He had been a pastor, but he was retired, and he was just... His wisdom was his forte, and wisdom becomes an important part of mentoring.
Yes, yes.
So books like James and Proverbs and the wisdom literature, I think we should devour that to know what is the heart of God and what God's plan for a healthy lifestyle really is.
Yes. You've been talking about different styles of mentorship. Yours is quite a gentle style. Sometimes it's directive, needs to be directive. Talk to me about the different styles of mentorship.
There are different styles in terms of not only how directive a person is, and you would know that, for instance, in counselling, there are multiple models of counselling, and even going back to when I trained, they were at various ends of the spectrum, so that you had Rogers, who basically was non-directive and just reflected back what the person said and was not able or allowed to be directive. And then there was rational emotive therapy, a guy by the name of Albert Ellis, who berated the people to think rationally. No. So there were different styles, and some suited people depending on their dilemma, but also their personality or whatever. So it is with mentoring. So there are seasons for one person being the most effective and whatever. I would say that it's not just this area of directiveness, but also how much structure there is. As you've gathered, my mentoring is quite unstructured, and I never know. I don't have a set. The mentor I had, first of all, I know what we would do in the first hour, I know what we would do in the second hour. He was very, and then he would literally give me homework, okay? Now, I'm not structured in that way. There would be things that I would be disappointed if the person didn't work on, and sometimes I would say something like, it'd be interesting in 3 months for us just to talk about how you've been going in that area, so that the person would know this is on the agenda. But I've never given homework in a structured sense like that. So the person who helped me so wonderfully when I was at college, he would have me say 4 key objectives in each year that I was aiming for, and every mentoring session we would be looking specifically at what had happened in each of those and rating how we were going. So there was not only outcomes, but we were rating the outcomes against objectives that had been set.
And that helped you?
And that helped me incredibly. And at one stage I said, it was a guy called Les Scarborough from John Mark Ministries, I said to Les, would you help me to train to be a mentor at some stage? And he said yes. So halfway through the first session, I said, oh, sorry, this is not going to work.
Oh, really?
There's no way.
How revealing.
I just have to accept, Les, that what you've done for me is brilliant, but I can't do it that way. I wouldn't be authentic, and I value it very much and would say it's at least as strategic and legitimate as my model, but it's not going to work.
What did he say?
He said, fine.
Yeah. Was that a style question then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
But you came to recognise that there was a style that suited you.
And also, for me, it was a stage and type of ministry that I needed something at that time that was quite strategic, because I'm not particularly able in areas of key strategy. Yeah. So he helped me to develop that.
Have you had mentors for yourself or mentorees who you've mentored who haven't worked out?
Oh, yes.
How do you know that? And is that still okay when things don't go as best
I
as
think
they
a
can?
part of mentoring should always be that there is what we call immediacy, and that's just being honest about whether this is working for you, and that can happen at any time, but there is at least every 12 months you stop and have a direct conversation with the person or people about whether it's working for them, whether I feel that I'm the right person and it's working as far as I can see. And then you have either a commitment to the next 12 months or yes. And sometimes I've said, look, do you mind if I help you find somebody who I think would be more effective for you? Or a person might say, the next stage of my life and ministry, I think I probably need this kind. So there's immediacy it's open at any time to say this is not working for me, as I did when I said this is not working for me the way you're training me. I don't get it, actually.
And it's still okay.
Yeah,
that's the point I wanted to ask.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's part of the security that we have, that this is not about ego or about how many people I'm mentoring or are people asking me. This is about finding the right fit for my stage of ministry, my life, my discipleship, and at some stage I might have moved, they may have moved, so let's have a strong sense of okayness about moving on.
Hi, I'm Peter Mayrick from Partners in Ministry. Partners in Ministry wants to support and equip church leaders to better lead their churches in Christ's mission. And we want to see the Church of Christ grow through effective ministry which produces disciples who make other disciples. We do this through providing one-to-one support for church leaders and by providing tools and training for church leaders which are focused on achieving effectiveness in church ministry and leadership. We would love to work with you, we'd love to meet you, and we'd love to support you in your ministry. If you're interested in taking up our offer, please contact us through info@partnersinministry.com or through our website, and we'll follow up with you. Thanks so much.
I'd like to hear your wisdom on the issue of Sabbath rest, and we've touched on that a couple of times in our conversations. You'd think that this mob of ministers, leaders, are the people who most get this, who teach it from the very Bible where it came, but often they're the last to truly get this. How do you help someone identify practical ways in which they actually just do that?
I didn't come to this idea of the importance of Sabbath or of rest easily, because I've probably said enough already for you to know that I didn't value sleep. I'd much rather burn out than rust out. That's what I was taught.
Yeah.
That was the ideology that I actually followed. My own experience in burnout, and I'd been close to it several times again since then, particularly when I was at the college. I only came to take it seriously when I was looking for some answer to the dilemma that I had been in and that pastors and leaders are in. And it was almost as if I had this aha kind of moment that said, it's right in front of you,
yes,
but you haven't taken enough notice of it either personally or in your training or in your actual mentoring. So I remember reading a couple of books about Sabbath and seeing how crucial it is to the whole idea of God's creation. He created us and he himself rested one day in 7, and that the nation of Israel was at least partly functioning around this whole principle. Even the land.
Fallow, yes.
The land needed to lie fallow 1 year in 7 in order to be able to keep reproducing.
And you still didn't get it.
No, and that the year of Jubilee, which is immediately after the passage in Leviticus about lying fallow for the land, that is 7 times 7. 7 sabbatical situations, and then it becomes a year of release or of Jubilee. So that the whole of the nation of Israel was actually structured and built around a recuperative process, and without that, the nation would not produce its food and the people would burn out.
So is it pride? Are you thinking, well, I'm too good for that, really? I don't need that?
It could be partly, but I think it's also partly our Western, our tendency to think that outcomes are the most important things, and in order to get the outcomes, you've got to be working harder, working longer, doing more.
Resting less.
Otherwise, you will never be successful. And I would now say it's about quality as even more than quantity.
Yeah.
That you need to make sure that the quality of life is there so that the output has quality, and that will be more powerful than any amount of quantity, because output may actually be counterproductive. If something grows and it's cancerous, it's not a good growth.
How do you get in before you start building fences near the cliff edge? Like, how are you nurturing someone through mentoring almost at the very start so that they actually get this? They understand it right from the start before they're in strife.
It doesn't happen very often.
That's interesting.
One of my senses about say why those pastors are in the Zoom room is that it's getting harder and harder, and they are probably facing some, not only through COVID, but through other factors, some deeply anxiety-provoking issues. So the person on the ground out there who's in the church and may be quite isolated and maybe even decentralised, they are saying, oh, this could be something that really helps me. So I think there's a stewardship responsibility to do this not only quickly, but to do it very well, because God's opening up an opportunity for this that even surprises people like Tim Hanna and myself.
Okay, wisdom, Keith. Can I leap into gender? It's a particularly tricky issue today on the back of Me Too, the sexual abuse, the consent issues that swirl around us. You've actually mentored many women. I wonder how appropriate that model is, cross-gender mentoring, either men to women, women to men, and whether that's changed or needs to change.
I've not found a problem in mentoring across the two sexes. In fact, I partly accept that men are from Mars and women from Venus, but the kinds of things that we're talking about, key issues about who we are and spirituality and key relationships, they are not gender specific. They are deeply created in both genders. And on a practical note, I would, on maybe half a dozen times in the years I've been mentoring, I would have said to a lady, a female, I just think you need to talk to your GP about that. Yeah. That would be as far as we've ever had any, and she would have been talking about some relationship issue that was maybe intimate or whatever, and I'd just say, you know, I can't.
But more than at perhaps any other time, there has to be a sense of trust,
yes,
and being above reproach, and whether we are safest ourselves,
yes,
and our mentoree.
Yes. And
perhaps.
just as I would say, well, people need to choose with whom they are more comfortable, and if a female is more comfortable with another female, that's completely okay, or a male with another male. I'm just saying I don't see any systemic dilemmas there for me personally, just every now and then, and I wouldn't sacrifice the mentoring value and relationship for just asking them every now and then to talk to their GP, or putting a little bit of a barrier up and saying basically we won't go there. But that's very, very, very rare. Yeah. So I would encourage, just as I mentor women, that women can mentor men. In fact, I would say, because there's an emphasis on relationships in mentoring, and I might get into trouble for this, as a generic statement, women might be better at it than men, because women are generally more in tune with the relational side of living than is a generic situation for men.
But always to be handled with care.
Always handled with care. Yeah.
Are there safety issues involved in mentoring that I would have to be aware of as a prospective mentor, Keith?
Safety in what sense?
Relationally?
Oh, yes. I think we have to be very careful about any counter-transference, if I can put it in a psychological term.
Which means?
Which means that the relationship is more than it actually appears to be because of the needs inside the person with whom I am mentoring. And there could be a transference on the part, it's transference and counter-transference. There could be a vulnerability that I have to a particular kind of person or female, that they are my mother or they are my father, or it rings a few bells or sets off a few tapes, so that I'm not actually able to be as present. And also that's both from the mentoree and the mentor. So that, for instance, a long time ago I had a lady come and asked for some help, and I actually said no immediately, and I went home and said to my wife, I didn't tell her who came, but a lady came to see me. I found her incredibly attractive. What she told me that day, it was heartrending. So I was emotionally, I just said, I think you need a female to mentor you, and I can recommend this person to you. I was talking to my twin brother about that, and he said to me, I can describe that lady to you.
Wow.
And I said, you're joking. And he said, and he described her, and I said, that's unbelievable.
Wow.
So we need to be aware of some areas of vulnerability, and you need to either be sensitive if somebody's obviously there's a bit of transference or counter-transference going on. Just recognise, hang on, this is actually not a good match.
Sensitive and honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Too. Can I go to money? Is it right to charge for mentoring?
I think mentoring is a very valuable help and a valuable ministry, and I think there are biblical principles for the fact that the person who is ministering in this way or in other ways has their needs met. So in principle there is absolutely no reason why it could not be a vocation that you support your family from. I doubt whether anybody would at the moment be able to support their family.
Yes.
At one stage I was mentoring 125 leaders in Australia, and we had all of our children married and no mortgage, otherwise we wouldn't have survived. So, but I'd hoped that it might be gradually changing in that. I have a couple of principles that I'm not sure that they should be general principles, because some people who are involved in mentoring may have different mortgage or family needs. I ask a couple of questions. Is your ministry willing and able to support the mentoring? In which case, if they are willing and able, I will accept payment. If they are not willing or able, then I will ask the question, who needs the money more, you or me? That's a very strange question to ask,
yes.
But I ask it regularly of new people. And the thing there is, if a person is in ministry and has a family to support and a mortgage, then the answer to that is very easy.
Yes. So
approximately a third of the people I mentor, and I have no idea at any time, any one day, whether a person is... My wife looks up after all of that. She asks me whether the person is paying or not. I know those. But she looks after all of that. It makes no difference to me. But I suspect my stage of life may be a significant factor there.
Although in defence of mentoring, and when churches can be often pretty stingy, there's great value in it.
Yes. And I would like to talk, as I sometimes get the opportunity to do, to boards and elders groups about the role that mentoring can play in the well-being and therefore ongoing sustainability of their leader.
It's very much in their interests. We've talked a bit about boundaries. Can I ask you about confidentiality? How do you deal with that?
Absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer. I would suspect that if I was not incredibly confidential, I would lose my mentoring ministry almost overnight. Yeah. And people know whether they are safe partly by whether you ever talk to them about anybody else you mentor.
Totally.
So they know if I never, and even if they make a comment, and I sometimes mentor multiple people within the one team, which has its hazards and its dilemmas, and I've made some mistakes there, but it's a very valuable thing to be mentoring multiple people and to get an idea of the culture and what's happening within the dynamics of the team, which are incredibly important. But you've got to make sure that anything that is other than your and my relationship and purview of ministry and life, anything that is injected by you that's outside that, I let go straight through to the keeper.
Yep, wise.
Absolutely.
Wise.
And people will recognise that. I will make sure even that I have no facial expression that says yes or no to that. And that happens semi-regularly. So people could talk about another team member, but they probably have learned that's going to go straight through.
So how do you handle a potential conflict of interest? If you're mentoring leaders and members of a team or others who are quite connected, how do you resolve that?
That's a very important practical issue that I have agonised about, because if I would highlight for you the 2 or 3 times in my mentoring where I have had to say to other people and to God, I'm sorry, I did not do well there. All of them would have involved conflict or potential conflict of interest, where I have not been either quick enough thinking or a bit too tired or just not on the ball in terms of how I've handled something like that. So I have thought many times, so don't mentor more than one person in the same ministry situation.
Oh, really? Yes.
I have thought that is a good idea. But then as I look at it a little more broadly, and many people would disagree with me about this, I think many very able people who could contribute incredibly effectively are in a general way debarred from doing that because of one area of conflict of interest. And I think that's a tragedy, because they could be so valuable in 95, and all they need to do, or somebody else needs to do, is to say, Keith, you've got a conflict of interest, please leave the room. Yeah. Or don't enter into this conversation.
There are ways
so
of
it needs to be managed rather than have a blanket prohibition on, because conflict of interest is all over the place.
Yes, that's right.
How far do you go with that? And I've come to believe that culture is incredibly important. So as you pick up how a team is functioning and how a ministry is going generally and whatever, you speak into the life and the ministry of any individual, but what you also have the opportunity to do when maybe the culture is not address that generically, but you can speak into the life of the person in a healthy way that has nothing to do with any comment about culture or another leader. So you can one by one actually seek to change the culture.
This question goes to mentoring, but way beyond mentoring, into every one of our lives, and that's the question of pride. So as a mentor, I'm in the position of offering my pearls of wisdom to these people in need. Pride is a real trap. I mean, I always remember the song with the lyric, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way." So how do you deal with pride and keep that in check in the context of mentoring, Keith?
A couple of immediate responses to that. One is that actually that's a character issue.
Yes.
That it's about humility, which is about acknowledging firmly what by God's grace you are able and you can contribute, and to do that realistically, because that's the nature of humility, is reality. So you don't put yourself down in areas that actually you have something or a great deal to contribute. But you also recognise your dilemmas, and you recognise that I'm a redeemed ratbag,
yes,
and therefore I approach you as a fellow traveller, and we both have our very strong giftedness areas and character development, but we both also need help. And the other really important thing to know is that I don't find much difficulty in the area of pride at all, because compared with my other ministries, it's very much out of sight.
Yeah.
It's behind the scenes. In fact, except if I or the person I'm mentoring tells somebody that I'm mentoring them, unless there's something goes wrong and you don't want that to happen, nobody would even know. So it's actually to some extent a little bit of a test of, the greatest amongst you will be your servant, as to whether we can actually do that and not expect anything in return except the incredible thankfulness of being alongside a person whom you value very highly.
And to consider deeply our character, because it's right there.
Yeah.
Should a mentor be directive? You've expressed your reluctance and your gentleness of style, but there does come a point, does there, where
Yes.
you have to be directive?
Yes. It's not very often, but definitely, and that's what I mentioned earlier. I think sometimes I have missed that, and I've needed to go back in some situations in my mentoring and apologise, because I was aware of a potential dilemma and didn't actually come directively enough forward. I think I need to treat that very carefully, because, as I've said earlier, mentoring is actually a very powerful relationship.
Yes.
And the influence in mentoring is profound. An illustration, one of the themes that unfortunately occurs semi-regularly is where a leader is saying, I think my time is coming towards an end, I'm done, or I'm not sure how much I have to give yet. And my general approach is to encourage the person to stay healthy and, as much as possible, to be sustainable and be able to get up after getting knocked down. That's my general stance. But on 3 occasions in my mentoring, I have said, probably in each case after years of us addressing this issue, I've said, okay,
There's the line.
it's time.
Yeah.
If you want to follow through on that, I will, as your mentor, support you in that. On each of those 3 occasions, the person has given their notice within 24 hours.
Wow.
So, I've thought they'll think about that or whatever, but that, when I said, okay, and I will support you in that, and let's work out the best way for you to do that, they've gone with it.
Turn around and do it.
So, directiveness, yes, but it's got to be really important, and you've got to be able to actually look ahead a little bit to see if I let this go, does that actually gather momentum in a negative way? So you've got to sometimes put a stopper in there.
I flagged this earlier about questions. Are there any go-to questions that you will typically rest on in your mentoring? Or how do I know how to ask the right questions that will elicit more than yes, no, or a grunt?
I have some questions in each of those 5 areas that I can drill down on. For instance, my question in the 5th area, the vulnerability and accountability area, is if Satan was going to get you out of this ministry, how do you think he might do it? Are you aware of those vulnerabilities, and do you have enough support to help you through them? So that's the question that I ask, because it actually puts it in a fairly wide framework, but it also indicates where I'm heading, and the heading direction is accountability and support. That's what so the questions need to be guiding the person towards what is going to be the most effective outcome for them, their living, their discipleship and their leadership in the immediate and the medium and the long term. So questions need to be open-ended, but they need to lead a person in a not a directive way, but an indicative way. Somebody said to me many years ago, Keith, you're the person who more than anybody else I've ever met who can get somebody to say what I know you want them to say. Now, I didn't realise that at all. I think all they're saying is that you can help a person to understand dynamics by just asking them the right question that will lead them to examine, if I go in this direction, what might be if I go in this direction,
in an environment of trust.
In an environment of trust, because they know I'm on their side.
Yeah. Self-disclosure. How much of yourself do you feel free to give? It could be pretty tricky sometimes.
Very tricky, but also quite important, particularly in the area of vulnerability, because it gives authenticity to a mentor, and particularly every person has their own private areas, and they shouldn't be a part of mentoring. As limited as possible, I think, but everybody needs their own private areas. But I actually think that providing it doesn't derail onto me what is happening, if I can be vulnerable appropriately, you can upset somebody and actually they come out of the mentoring more worried about you than about themselves.
That's oversharing.
That's actually not a good idea. So it can't be self-illuminating in the sense of bringing the light onto yourself. It's for the sake of helping the other person to move forward. So you're not the centre, but you actually can help people to see, wow, okay, I'm not the only one.
Yes, yeah.
Even my mentor is struggling in some... So that, for instance, in some seminars that I give, I am vulnerable and open about a very mild time where I had to say to my wife, I got onto a couple of sites that I shouldn't have been on, and I want to be accountable to you, and I share that. And I say to my wife, if that ever happens again, I'm going to tell you within 24 hours because I think that will help me. So that's a bit of a risk because people think they were actually medical sites and not initially they were, nothing dramatic, but I actually think that can have a person who's sharing that this is one of their dilemmas to say, okay, Keith understands what I'm talking about.
Totally.
He's not a lily white or anything like that.
As we begin to wrap up, can I ask two simple but very significant questions? What do you think the key has been to keeping on in the business of ministry and especially mentoring, Keith?
Go deeper to go further.
Yeah.
And it's been, it's every now and then you hit a point where you won't be able to keep. I was in my role at the college, I think it was 2 or 3 years, and I came home one night, we lived on the college property, and I said to Marg, I'm done. I'm a boy in a man's job. This is too hard.
Wow.
And we sat down and we worked out I had 3 options. One was you can resign and be a fairly short-term person in that role. Or my second option was, Keith, just get over it. Toughen up. Well, don't be a bleeding heart. Just do it. And the third was, that Marg and I talked about, was go deeper. Just go a little deeper at this time. Actually believe the promises of God, that he works everything together for good, that there's nothing that's going to be too hard that he'll let come across. And, you know, do you really believe those? Really,
nothing will separate you from the love of God.
Yeah, press into that absolute assurance, get that intimate organic relationship. So that happens, and it still happens because my capacities are gradually waning. So in order to be healthy and still very positive, I have to accept that life is gradually closing in on me. I can't do some things that I used to be able to do. So do I become grumpy, or am I actually before God able just to accept that and to be thankful for the incredible opportunities that he gives me?
It seems to me through 4 hours of conversations with you today, in the one day, you're doing pretty well still.
Thank you.
Final question is, what would you say to God about the experiences and the insights that he's opened up for you in life and faith through mentoring, Keith?
The short answer is just thank you. You're amazing. I love you. I don't understand some things yet.
You're not God.
I still don't understand why there's so much pain in the world from a loving, gracious God, but I suspect that has to do with the fact that everything you do is filtered through love and not through power, and that I don't get that. And if we got that, we would understand. You gave us the brilliant opportunity for free will, and that was a courageous decision to create us in your image. Thank you for doing that. I'll understand that one day. I look through a mirror misty at the moment, but I trust you. There's so much going positively that I'm in your camp.
And I thank you for wonderful, immensely wise and insightful conversations as we've covered through this, Keith.
Thank you
so
for the
grateful
opportunity.
To you. Well done.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. I'm sure you've also gained an immense amount from these 4 conversations in the mentoring series. I'm Leigh Hatcher. It's been my privilege to be leading us through these conversations. Bye for now.